Yay. Good morning, Yvonne.
Good
So
morning, Sovereign.
to gather again.
Yes,
Very happy to be live streaming this to the Earth Heroes platform. It's a wonderful place that this can be viewed, and whoever's on there, please leave some comments. Today we're
yes,
talking about the return to or the retrieving of our indigenous nature. And I think it's a beautiful title. It's very much in resonance with most of my life's work, which has been that journey to return to the original innocence, the original self, the original natural ways of being, human nature. I found syntropy and syntropic agroforestry being, I couldn't imagine how I would be relating to the wholeness of our human ecology without this syntropic comprehension and the strategies of life that nature operates on, that we are part of nature in that sense. And yet we are also having, like we talked about in a previous conversation, we have different worlds to our own individuated being. We have an emotional world. We have a physiological world called our body. We have an emotional body. We have a spiritual soul, spirited nature, and we have a psychological world as well. And these bodies, these worlds, these aspects of our nature, they make us a little bit more diverse, maybe at the most, because I don't want to necessarily, compare myself to life out there and say that, well, we're better than the deers, and we're because we're more intelligent, because it's kind of proven that we're not really taking the test too serious as a collective human species. But because others are failing, then others are actually realizing, like, whoa, okay, we actually have a great responsibility, and that is through our relationship with nature and with Gaia, with Earth, and as custodians and stewards of life and consciousness. We have tremendous roles that we can take on. For me, and we'll get into that later, it's that element of the mind that I find very intriguing. And so this retrieval of our indigenous nature, I very much have looked at through the return to my indigenous mind, because I was raised and brought up, or call it brought down, brought down and educated in a very Western mindset, a set, like a real kind of framework, like this is how the world works. And most of it was all not true, and it still isn't true. And tremendous amount of it is all entirely fantasy based. And that's not to dismiss its existence. But if we as humans treat something that is a fantasy, but we treat it as if it's totally real, and then we forget that it actually is not real, well, then we're living in Maya. Then we're really living in an illusion that is not accurate, and it's not the full reality of what really exists. And I call that human damage, because I have seen what the effects of believing things that aren't real and believing them to be real, what that has done on the earth and in relationship to the indigenous peoples of this earth. Well, we all know parts and pieces of the tremendous impact of what this Western mind, this colonial mind, this human damaged mind has brought about. But before we go into all of that, I just want to welcome you here and just invite you to take us into this exploration and journey together with your opening.
Well, it's also exciting for me because I listen to you, and then it's like this gateway opens and all this stuff comes down. I'm going, oh, really? Oh, that's exciting. So the first thing that came down with all that you said before is that it's all a state of consciousness. So when we address whether we have an Indigenous mind or we haven't, or whether it's colonialized or whether there's human damage, that is all still of the old paradigm of physicality. And for me, what I have learned over the years is that to get an overview, to be able to find a way to fit it into a new earth experience, I have to go away from anything that is even remotely related to my possibility of having a judgment, having an opinion, having a belief, or even having an experience. And I've had many of those. And if I take it then to, from a distance, everything always looks better. But if I take it to a place where I see everything as a state of consciousness, then what I realize and what I see is that the Indigenous people who, everyone seems to have this self-righteousness about, well, I'm, this because I am, I'm more connected to the land, or I'm more connected to this or that. But none of that is true. In consciousness, we are all one. So we all belong to the land, and we all belong to the quantum field. It is the roles we seem to want to play when we get down here. So examining what Indigenous means for me when you wanted to bring up the subject was really a very simple answer, and that is it is what I'm born to. And what I'm born to is an exploration of all these things, to be able to then transform them into a higher state of consciousness where all the divisions are then reduced to oneness. So when I'm looking at returning to my Indigenous self, it means that I am one with all that is. Now, that is an overview. Of course, we're going to go into the details a little bit more, and I would like to have a look at what you call I call it the Western mind and the conditioned mind. And I can tell you that for a long time, I listened to people saying that we owe them an apology. Well, I don't owe anybody an apology because I didn't do anything. And I'm not going to be punished for what my forefathers or whatever did, because that wasn't me. And so what I do see is that there are no innocent parties. And each of us comes on this physical plane for the purpose of self-exploration and self-expansion, so that we are part of this whole evolving of nature. And I guess where I'm going to be coming from more than anything is coming back to our Indigenous self, comes back to knowing that I am nature. I'm not separate from nature. I am part of the fauna of nature. I am an animal, a mammal, and probably a lot of people won't like to be called an animal, but you are. And so when we understand that and we stop being so of ourselves and have this separation, what you talk about as human damage, particularly in the white society. When I first went to the East to live, what I learned was just by the color of my skin, I was put on a pedestal. And I didn't like that because that didn't fit with me at all. And so I have never seen color. People would ask me, because I was married to an Asian eventually, and my children are part Asian and beautiful. And so people used to say, well, what ethnicity is that person? I go, I have no idea. I wouldn't know if they had green dots on them. I just see their energy and what they radiate. So it is an ingrained conditioning that we're suffering from, that we do have to grow beyond. And so let's play with it today and see where we go.
So great. Yeah, I was sharing before we got on that of course, I can only really speak on behalf of my own experience in my return to this, what I call the indigenous mind. And those are just words, but I've found that navigating my return to wholeness and navigating that internal landscape, doing that inner child work, I found, and I was shown by my own spirit grandmothers, that it's really important to name and put language to what we're actually navigating with around. Because if we don't appropriately describe or articulate or give it a sound, it's like me saying, let's see that thing behind me, and it's like, well, there's a whole bunch of greenery there. And so if I don't call out the coconut on the left hand side of me, then people will just be looking at just greenery. And so that's what our combined fields then bring into focus. And I've found that the exploration, because I look at this also through an archetypal map, using the wording of an indigenous mind and return to that, it allows me to really ponder and be curious what it looks like. And one of the things that I had the fortunate opportunity to, I guess, be brutally confronted with, as I would really say it, I used to run an organization called Par Pachamama Spirit of Earth, and I would help raise funds, build websites, build promotional. It was a conscious media platform that I deployed solely in a pro deo orientation. I've, for the most part of my life, always just had enough and just used my time to be in service. And that led me to co-organize a global elder gathering in Yarrabah, Australia during the solar eclipse. And I was able to underwrite a lot of the food distribution and bringing the networks for the housing. And that led to organizing a water gathering and being tasked with the responsibility to create an international forum on water for the First Peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it was during that lead up and during my actual being amongst the grandmothers and grandfathers of those peoples that I got really confronted with. Here I was, a guy in service. I didn't do it for money. I did it just out of love, out of recognition that the indigenous hold certain keys, certain concepts, certain awareness, certain elements of our human journey and consciousness that needed to become shared and reheard and revisited, and also really married on a level of personal connection, both between tribes, between nations, coming into remembrance of the unity in all. And I got confronted with the ferocity outside of all my loving, caring, willing, devotional service. I was still appropriating based on what I know and how I know that things work. I was still overriding and not checking in and non-consensually making decisions. Um, and I could hide behind everything because, look, I'm been tasked to be the organizer of this event. Like, how can I not make some executive decisions? And so my journey over the years has been to, like, what does it mean to be in service? And the indigenous world as a reflective mirror has shown me that it's so much more than just helping, aiding, supporting. It's all of that. And yet there is a whole realm beyond that in which my Western mind truly had to surrender itself. It truly had to let go of the mechanisms of control, of management. This is how the world works. I literally had to detonate my Fruppy land based on everything that I know about landscapes in the digital world, websites, platforms, payment gateways, plugins, web apps, you know it all, all these terms that we don't really want to go into. But I really had to just blow it all to bits because I was holding on to what I know, which was really stopping me to falling into grace. and falling into indigenous life ways that are not worried or stressed or doing any of this, like trying to work it all out stuff in order to arrive at what they already knew would just come about quite effortlessly. And so I was in a cute way kind of laughed at, like, I'm a little baby there in that environment. And so it's kind of like they see me being all busy, he'll get there, he'll stumble and he'll fall and then he'll burn out, and then he may actually get it. And so that was my hero's journey, and that was a real confrontation to come away from that gathering, that I never really had awareness of how programmed and how much confusion and how much blur there was in my mind. And so I've been working for years to deprogram and find the language to articulate what this Western mind all is, not to blame it or shame it, but just to bring the truth out. Is it actually true? And 9 out of 10 times, they were just all belief systems that were still rooted in my own unresolved emotional imprinting. They were still belief systems coming from fear, the need for control based on lack and scarcity. And that's been a beautiful gift in my deep engagement in ceremony with the indigenous world, to be able to see through the layers of my own programming and realize that if I just let go of all the stuff that I've been programmed with, slowly but surely, what comes back to the forefront as an emergence is that indigenous nature that is one of love, it's one of kindness, and that no longer does fear as a practice of securing or. But yeah, that's an aspect that I really have found within myself to be quite potent. The analyzing and witnessing of our Western mind in reflection of the depth and the beauty of this indigenous heart mind. It is, wow, it's so much more peaceful.
Yeah, for me, the Indigenous mind, as you speak, I think what attracts us to it is the innocence and the simplicity and the connection to life, the flow of life, that we in the Western society have not so much surrendered, we have sold out, out on for the material and the commercial. Because that's how we are, as you called, educated. But I've not had the same experiences as you, but I have had some amazing experiences with many different Indigenous cultures. And what I've noticed, it's interesting because, as I said in the beginning, we have actually in lifetimes experienced different Indigenous cultures. And how I learned about that first was because my brother, who was a cinematographer, he went to South America to do a filming of a well-known chef in those days who wanted to experience and explore South American cuisine. And when he came back, he showed me some of his photos. And when he turned a page, and there was a beautiful photo of Machu Picchu. And at that stage, I had not been there. And I just sat there and my heart just stopped. And I looked at it and I went, that's my home. For apps, never see. He actually printed that photo for me and it hangs in my bedroom opposite my bed. It's the last thing I see at night. It's the first thing I see in the morning. And so years later, I went on a shamanic journey and pilgrimage through Peru. And everywhere I went, it was like I'd come home. And I went to all the different sacred sites. But when I arrived there, I would suddenly be thrown into past life experiences of where I was and who I was at that time. And it was the most amazing thing that I lived through. And my connection to the Inca, the Incas was like, oh, wow, these are my people. These are my people. And so I've always had that real feeling. I had the same experience when I went to Mexico and with the Mayan origins. Now, some of my friends are very drawn to the Egyptian cultures, and I'm not. So obviously, I haven't had a lifetime in that. And when I went to Asia, I am incredibly connected to the Asian cultures. That it feels like home. Bali, for instance, the Balinese, their simplicity and their connection to their spiritual self, their oneness, the wholeness of mind, body, and spirit. And we have such separation in that. We'll stick the spirit in church on Sunday, and we'll stick the physical in a gym on Monday, and then we'll go and we'll put the mind in school for the rest of the week. And then, really, we are so compartmentalized. We haven't got that unity that the Indigenous don't give up. The other thing I think that you talk about is the white people or the Western society's mind always puts it above, as if we're going, the ministries that went in and the arrogance of it. To go and tell people that their way is not right, but our way is better. For me, that absolutely, when I think about that really makes my heart shrivel up. And so I look at that and I go, how dare you? Why not go in there and be open and learn? Because they've got a lot to teach us. That what we've forgotten. It's not something that isn't us. It's just that we've forgotten and we've sold out for the gratuities of being able to have a nice car and a nice house and a nice something else. And we've just lost that connection to source and soul that the true Indigenous still keep, and they keep it sacred. So when we go there and we have the humility that they deserve and the honor that they deserve, because the ancients keep the wisdom of the planet. They hold the wisdom of the planet. We don't. When you think about our current medical, whatever you might like to call it, industry, it's only just over 100 years old. And look at it. It's directing us and telling us how we're supposed to live, what we're supposed to do with our lives. When you look at the ancients who have been managing their health and well-being for millions of years in relationship with, as you so lovely, with the ecology of the earth, with the gift of the beautiful forests and all the medicine that we need to maintain this beautiful physiology is there for us. But no, we don't want that. Gosh, no, we're better than that. We would like to go into a laboratory and make some other shit. Pardon me. But when you look at it, that's what we need to do. We need to come back to understanding our true self, our authentic Indigenous self, which is, it's here and it's crying out to be heard and to be returned to its origin. And that is where I think you and I are really going to play today, and to see what is it that it offers that we now need to reignite and re-embrace in our everyday life for the new earth.
Well, that's where our Indigenous nature really resides, is in close connection with the natural world, and not this artificialized reality that has such a strong predominance over our consciousness, really. And not to say that the technology that we're using is not super useful to be able to explore this. So it's both at the same time. It's total chaos, and there is amazing. It's an amazing springboard for us to jump ourselves back into remembrance. It's just the art of it. And the mastery of that navigation is not to get caught in the, ooh, what else can I go and look at? Ooh, what else can I go and look at? Because a lot of people like the notion that nature is our teacher and we're out of balance with nature and we have to have more connection with nature. And there are no rules. Nature doesn't say, yep, that means that you have to have a permaculture patch. If you don't have one, you don't have, what's your ticket into the new earth? Oh, you don't have a permaculture patch. Enough, sorry, can't make it. Oh, you're not saving seeds. You're not keeping bees. Oh, wow, you're not hugging trees. And so there are no prerequisites other than to a return to a natural, not a I have to do this in order to get somewhere, because that never works. It is a return and really a letting go of a whole range of addictions, what we call maybe even attractions, and really put them under the loop to look at, how do I become more free? Because what I discovered is that the only thing to return to being our nature is not something out there on top of a mountain after a heroic battle with demons and dragons and villains and no, none of that. Of course, it may feel like we have to navigate a whole range of challenges as we free ourselves of the constraints of our current relationships that are limiting our return to self. And that's something that feels really relevant to check in with, and is not to cast people out, but to make this life about you. I've made this life about me. And that's been really, really challenging in several ways, because I've got two kids. They're in Australia. How selfish am I? And all the shame that I had to deal with, and all the blame, and all the I'm not good enough, and I'm not there. Well, thank God that I had already committed myself to re-enabling my nature. And so she has been extremely graceful to infuse me with remembrance of what the syntropic life ways, what the natural ways of navigating as a human being would look like. And this is not something that I got out of a book or got from, purely divine channelings. This was just about remembering whether or not what it is that I was thinking or doing or choosing or orientating myself around was actually natural. Because our cells, literally ourselves, the sentient consciousness of this body and the cells in this brain, we all know what is natural or what is not natural. But what happens in the process of asking that question, and then also choosing to get out of the unnatural thought patterns and thought behaviors, because they're all programs, what happens is it gets really real and really confrontational really quickly, because there's probably a whole bunch of things that we are doing that aren't necessarily natural. Addictions, whatever we want to call them. The good thing is, though, is that everything in life is performing a function with purpose. And so instead of then going like, oh, shit, I have all this human damage, I need to get out of this, this is bad. Well, then we just perpetuating based on the same mechanics of our own pre-existing mind. We're just continuing really our fruity land. We're just changing belief systems. We're just putting that from what we love to do now into the box of like, oh no, that's evil, because that's not getting me to enlightenment. Well, the path to enlightenment is not by cutting things off and getting into a space where we make more rules. What I see a lot of people in the so-called spiritual new cage movement, as I like to call it, because it became a bit of a new cage. It was, in the beginning, it was a lot of freedom, but then it turned out to just become a whole plethora of new ideologies and spiritual fantasies that I have no issues with, but they are also able to cage people, to keep people from actually, because there's always a new book, there's always a new workshop, there's always a new modality, and now it's this and now it's that. And I was a spiritual window shopper for years, so I'm speaking from experience. I was just like, as soon as stuff, because all these modalities have have truth and beauty and a return to wholeness always as a part of what it is that they're delivering. Everybody is bringing something forth of their gifts, of their understanding. But as soon as it got really real, and I got the opportunity to really start putting some things into practice, I'd be like, oh wow, oh wow. Well, no, I'm way more into guys that have a shaven head and that talk about quantum physics like they are communicating with God. And so I would leave this womb work that I was really exploring, the return to the womb. I was leaving it because it was triggering layers and levels of my own uncomfortability around really accessing some unresolved emotional imprinting. And so I just kind of jumped over there because I had the fortunate opportunity to be exposed to some of the most amazing healing modalities. One of them was birthed into being limbic imprint recoding. And if there's any modality that I found really impressive, inspiring, and deep, going into the visceral experience, into the body, into the cellular memory, it was that. But I was just shifting my energy away. And so I see that this new cage movement has the capacity, the new age teachings, to kind of trap us and not allow us. Of course, that's all up to ourselves. But without that awareness, it only took me, a couple of years to figure out like, that's what I was doing. I was just avoiding myself. And so it's that return within and the willingness to show up for that and the willingness to really look at, is what I'm doing natural? Are these thoughts natural? And start with all the self-abusive thoughts. By all means, don't make it about, oh, it's not natural to think a negative thought about this person that is over there. No, you can inquire with your judgments, but also know that it's performing a function with purpose, because there's always a message. And this is where what I love about human nature is that our cellular human nature, our indigenous human nature, the cells of this body, the processes and the life strategies that course through these veins, that run through the meridian system, that run through every layer of our body, is performing a different function. And it's all with purpose. But that is still operating on our original nature. Yes, it's being hijacked. And yes, there's fluoride in our brain, and there's heavy metals in our hippocampus, and there's all sorts of chemicals, and our liver is probably overburdened, and you name it, because we're coming through an industrial age. But that still doesn't make our nature change. Our bodies are still our greatest allies. They still store all the memory of what is natural, what is truthful, what is just, and what is in alignment with the purpose, the gift, and the opportunity, what we as spirit in embodied form came here for. And our body will do everything that it can to ready us for the capacity to fully be our magnified light source coding. But our trauma sits in the way of that. And so our cells will react. They will react. They will make judgments here. Our cells will cause all sorts of self-abusive thoughts to happen. Why? Is because the body is messaging from the unconscious and the subconscious, that internal landscape, the stories that we really benefit grappling with, exploring, and then resolving. Because what emerges from that is the wholeness of our nature. Our indigeneity becomes restored, because through the process of resolving trauma and stories, we don't need identity anymore that keeps us separate from ourselves, from each other, from nature, and really from this new earth that we have an opportunity to really bring into being. So this is a dense subject, and it's beautiful. It's very multi-layered, and I'm just going to give it to you, Yvonne, because there's probably more to it.
I just love your passion. It's so good to listen to. And look, absolutely, for this organic nature that is who we truly are, and that we've forgotten. is in every cell of our body. And I always say that truth lies below the ears. Above the ears, forget it. That's just a mess. And so when I'm asking myself, am I being true to my nature, or am I true to my soul path, as I now know, then I listen to my body, because every cell in our body is configured to have you live your authentic self. It is your head that messes with it and then gets this fragmentation occurring in your energy field, which then, gets the confusion and all the things that you just talked about. So the journey to come back to our indigenous self is to go from, my favorite thing, from head to heart to soul. And it's this journey where you have an inner knowing what is natural for you, what is in resonance with you, because we are electromagnetic beings of source. And so being on this plane is just, it's such a gift, it's such an opportunity for us to explore. And we're given this amazing chance to be one with this planet, and this planet pulsates all by itself. And when we are in alignment with the earth and in alignment with the heavens, whatever you want to call that, and ourselves, then there is this beautiful synchronicity, this dance of energy. But in Western society, because we have been distracted and given all these trinkets to play with, and look, I love some of the trinkets, and as you say, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We keep that which will enrich and enhance our state of nature, just like we are learning about ecology and how to companion plant, and how to grow, beautiful food, and all of those things. We're learning those things, and so there is a lot we're learning that we can use our current evolved technology for, but it isn't in place of. I think that is the big one. It's not in place of. To be able to use the wisdom of the ancients. And that is something that I often think about our Western society, and coming back to this understanding of what is it in the, and let me just clarify, not all Indigenous tribes and societies have been able to maintain their own connection to wisdom. So let's not generalize. The more exposure they've had to the West, the more separated have they become. So just to say, well, they're Indigenous people, therefore they're great. Well, that depends. And there isn't a right and wrong in either. There is just this understanding of the soul and the connection to source and to soil. And as we now travel into this time, into the new earth, I look at what do the ancients, and I love Greg Braden for that, because he's, that's all his wisdom comes through the ancients, and he's done a lot of research in that. And so when I look at the ancient wisdom, then what is it that is so important right now to use as an infrastructure and a foundation for the new earth that we're moving into? And they keep telling me it's not the new earth, it's the old earth restored. So thank you. I can't get away with saying things if they're not accurate according to my whatever stuff that comes downloaded. So the old, and so we're retrieving those old wisdoms, those ancient cultures that looked up at the stars and knew exactly where they were going and what was coming. They didn't have a problem. It was natural to them. We have to go and buy a magazine and read the stars, which have been written by somebody who hasn't got a clue. So the beautiful things that we are retrieving. So it's the retrieval of the ancient wisdoms that I see as important for the New Earth sanctuaries and the New Earth communities is, and the other thing that I think is so valuable for the ancient Indigenous culture is their way of living in a connected unit, how they keep their family together. And it isn't just one parent looking after one child, it is shared. Yes, we do that now, except we do it in separate houses. And so we don't do it together. We do it like, well, I'll just drop my kids off to you and you have my kids for a while and then I've got my kids on my own. And so there isn't that unity, there isn't that sharing, so that the children actually don't just learn from one parent, they learn from their, as you say, their grandmothers and their great grandmothers. And they value the wisdom of the elders. And this is something that we in the Western society have really, really not been good about. We look upon age as something to be avoided, like death. Well, I've got news for you. Avoiding is not going to work. It's going to come and bite you in the butt. It just depends on who you are when you get there. And, you know, this wonderful communication and communing that is in those old tribal cultures is what we need to reconnect with, that we need to rebuild on, where we bring our families together to share, to support, to love, and to do away with this sense of separation. That is what I value in the Indigenous cultures, that amazing connection to life. So many people in the West go searching. They go to India to sit in an ashram, and they go to South America to do some crazy medicine stuff so that they can get out of their body. And look, if that's what your soul tells you to do, that's great. But for me, that's not where it's at. Sit with the people. You don't need to do all of these things. Sit with the people, listen to them, feel their energy. I mean, I loved doing my shamanic journey in South America, because the people, it's their peacefulness, their inner peace. They're so attuned to nature, so attuned to the air that they breathe, so attuned to the stars, to the clouds, to everything is telling them, giving them a message. Everything is giving them a message. So they interpret their lives through what nature is telling them, and the nature of the water, the nature of the animals. As for us, what we do, we turn on the television, and that's our news. Well, look where that's got us. That is what I want to retrieve. I want to retrieve the ability to look in the sky. And can I just share a story? I know I'm going off a little bit, but I want to share a story. I belong to a bushwalking club, and I'm kind of known as this cookie lady who is able to talk to the weather. I don't like walking in the rain. So I'm always saying to the weather people, listen, I want to go for a walk tomorrow, so can you organize this? Now, we need it to be dry. I don't care if it's not completely sunny, but dry at least until 2:30 p.m., because that's when we usually have just about finished. And then when I go to the walk and people go, oh, I think it's going to rain. I said, okay, nobody talks about the weather. Everybody just keeps saying thank you. So I go out and it's dry. And then they go, oh, I think it looks like that. I'm the one that does that. And so we have beautiful, and they say, oh, Vonn's coming. It'll be good weather. So that actually happened on, would you believe, Lake Titicaca. So I got lost in a little dinghy with the outboard motor dying, with a Japanese monk, a Peruvian guide, and one of my students. Three people who couldn't swim, and we did not have any life. There was a deflated tire tube in the bottom of this little dinghy, and there was this incredible wind, and we were stuck in the middle. We couldn't go anywhere. And Miguel, who was our little boatman, he was going backwards and then paddling forward and trying to get us somewhere. Eventually, he managed somehow to get us to a little side place. But the weather was really bad. So I said to the Japanese monk, come. And he said, what? And I said, well, now we are going to stand here at the front of this little boat and we are going to fix the weather. And he looked at me and said, we're going to what? I said, come on, you've got faith. We're going to stand here and we're going to say, listen, we need this wind to come down because we are going to have to find our way back to the shores on another little dinghy. And we'd like to get there in one piece. So please still the winds. And he just looked at me and said, really? I said, yeah, you can do it. So there we stood, two crazy people on the front of this boat, and we stopped the wind. And so that is what I learned about being Indigenous. It is being one with the clouds, one with the wind, one with the soil. And we have it within us. We have it, and it's not because I'm different and well, I'm different, but because I'm a miracle worker. It's because I become aligned with my true nature as part of nature, not as an arrogant, separate human that thinks I can control. Oh, I just said I could control it. Yeah, scrap that. But you do it with love. You do it as one with, not with power over. Very different.
So beautiful, Yvonne. It reminds me of my time navigating with Greg Braden around the creation of rain and the stopping of rain and what's required in the process, which is all ancient Indigenous wisdom. But it's in our nature. It's nothing special. It's just the faculties that are naturally embedded within our whole beingness, that with appropriate consciousness and presence and awareness, which is not complicated, but to a Western mind, it's really like, okay, so now I got to do the first step, and then I got to do, and then I got to feel, and then I got to see the image. I got to be in my heart. Oh, these things that I have to do. And meanwhile, the shamans just kind of look at the class and they're like, yeah, this doesn't really work. So they go, thank you. And the class is clear. It's there is so much interconnection that we have been programmed out of, that we have been kind of trained out of, domesticated out of, and it had to be all that way in order for us to be able to reappreciate it from a level. It's almost like if you go astray far enough, you start really missing home and what that really means. And we've left our inner connection with nature as a collective Western mind a long time ago. And this goes all the way back to the days of pharaohic time, when it all started just going downhill. And we can ascribe it to the intergalactic star cycles and what we all can find in those patterns and cycles in nature. And yet what I find is, okay, so we are here now. And where did we come from? Let's not dwell too much on it. Acknowledge it so that we can learn what the message is. Because the message seemed to be quite the opposite from what the message really is. The message is, go look here, buy this, go get this, you'll be so successful. Happiness is just around the corner. We are here for your protection. These are the messages that we get every day, bombarded through this television screen or whatever form of media. And if you look up the root origin of media, it really means spellcasting. It means seeding vision and seeding the casting of images. And it comes out of Medea, which were the greatest spellcasters of the olden age, that were hired by the early sheikhs and pharaohs to kind of do the magic on the minds of the people to shape the perception, which is called socially engineering. Well, we're coming out of that in full capacity, but the programming is so thick and thorough that it takes quite some willingness to really show up for it. And yet, the return to nature only feels difficult to a heavily programmed mind if it identifies with what it knows about reality and life as to being the truth. Well, I went to school and I suffered 20 years, so it must all, have some value, because otherwise it was all a waste of time. And so we hold on to a lot of ideologies and belief systems that we were all programmed with, that literally stand in the way of this indigenous nature being able to just emanate through us and allow the wisdom within, allow our soul to speak through ourselves, and allow our mind, therefore, to actually be able to come to pay attention and be like, oh, I could actually play. I could be a part of this. I could join in, because it's not about ditching the mind or getting the programming totally dissolved and turned off. It's about just bringing the four bodies back into harmony, but letting the heart lead. And in that, what I just wrote down is, you spoke about getting into the new earth. For me, it's really been about getting out of that human damage and being just willing to show up for that. And it's okay. So we all got programmed. We all got confused. We all got done over. We've all gone through the whole lot, whether it's been rape, violation, abuse. The trauma triangle is a choice to stay in, because that will keep us here. And that will keep us in right, wrong, good, bad, positionalities, and identity, kind of hunger for an identity to cling on to. And the identity that we're speaking about, that isn't necessarily an identity, it's an archetypal nature form of being, which is your indigeneity, your indigenousness. The reason that I really wanted to speak about this with you, Yvonne, and we may actually want to revisit this subject, because it's a rich world, is that what I found most valuable in my journey back into my indigenous self, and recognizing that I am indigenous to this earth, is that one of the elders actually reminded our entire group of, I organized for about 120, 130 people to gather for a whole week around this water forum in New Zealand. And for me to hear that, it watered a seed that was dormant in me. He says, you are all indigenous to this earth. And I took that away, and that seed, of course, sprouted and has blossomed and bloomed and is fruiting and is now also producing seed, because I'm resounding those exact words. Not that I want to come off with any sense of authority, but I know that I have a presence and I have comprehensions that would resonate with people. And I think that if I, through my wording, could just water, and everything that you shared, if that could have just watered some of the seeds that lie dormant within, all that we as humans have to do is allow for that reemergence of that inner knowing to be made room for. And that's where I then say, well, that means pruning. That means getting out of dysfunctional relationships. That means just no longer binging, crap food on the couch while watching some soap operas because you don't have anything better going on in your life. It's like we have so much more that we could come into, and it is through community that I feel becomes most fulfilled. Because if we just do it on our own, gosh, it is tough. And the truth of it is, it doesn't even work, and it's not real. Because any of my growth, self-liberation, return to wholeness, the release of trauma, whatever it's been, it's really come about through the capacity of others to witness me, to hold space for me, to listen. And so this indigeneity that I can now speak about in colorful ways has really come about because we are all part of that weaving. We are all part of that ecology. We are all part of that human nature because we simply are. It's that simple.
Yeah. For me, it's all about the fact that we radiate our essence. So if we don't share who we are, then that's a waste. So everything that and there is no hierarchy. When I first started on this journey, and my mission was to educate, not educate, to prepare people for these days of transition. So you can imagine if I started to talk about how this earth was going to birth itself into a new higher consciousness, and we didn't have those words, people were like, but no, people wanted to know. And so I've been teaching this for a long time, but one of the things that I used to say to everyone who came to my door, do not sit at my feet, I will kick your butt, because that is not my role. We have again been conditioned to put people up there, and then these celebrities, I mean, for goodness sake. And I fell into that trap a little bit because my daughter became a celebrity in a country that she went to, and I was quite proud of that for a little while, and I still am, because it's not the celebrity that I'm proud of. I'm proud of the leadership, and that's what you're talking about. We all have a position. And it isn't better than, it is just that my configuration is one of leadership. You said recently that you are a natural leader, and as am I. But we're not naturally above people. We have a skill and what I call an energetic configuration, which naturally allows us to be the bush bashers, right? To go out there and try before we buy, and then to make it easier for the people that we then encourage to come the same way. So everyone has their place, their natural configuration that will allow them, when we return to our nature, then it'll just be, well, my nature is to be a motor mechanic, and I'm really good at it. And my nature is to be a butcher, but doesn't it, motor mechanic, is he better than the butcher? No. Do they work well together? Yes. One needs to eat and the other one needs to drive. It's that symbiotic dance that we have to come back to learn, instead of looking at our identities as being better than the other. Yeah. We're all here to provide a service in grace. And when we learn to do that without the need for eventually remuneration, because it will mean that will no longer be necessary, we can just support each other and serve and provide services for each other. And no one will ever go without. But that's a fair way away yet. But that is where we will eventually be going. And that is when we return to our true nature, that the flora of nature shows us, where one tree doesn't sound better than another tree. They actually quite like each other. And so that is what I find is really important for us to come back to our Indigenous self, is to see ourselves as nature, in the flow with nature, not separate from. And when we do that, yes, things will happen that look like a miracle. They're only a miracle because we've forgotten. I know that because when I was doing my shamanic teachings, trainings, I learned that it is through nature. When I give up my identity, and I used to sit with these beautiful people, and they would just sit still. And one of the things that I keep saying in the sanctuary that I'm intending to create here on the Mornington Peninsula is, I want a stillness chapel, not a chapel to meditate, just a chapel that is going to be completely soundproof, and that you sit in complete stillness where you can feel the air and just sit. And we don't do that enough. We're always on the go. We're always doing something, so that we don't smell the air. One of the things that I've noticed recently is that the air is actually palpable. If you sit in stillness and hold your hands out, you can feel the air. It's palpable. But if you are running from here to there, the air is just something that you inhale and exhale, and you don't even register what that wonderful thing is doing to give you life. So for me, meditation has mostly left me. It's now stillness, total stillness, where I can communicate and commune with life itself as it is vibrating all around me. That is when I'm totally in connection with my Indigenous self.
So beautiful, Yvonne. We are well over the top of the hour, and the gods decided to go mow the lawn next door. Um, and so I want to thank you for sharing yourself. Thank myself as well. Don't forget myself. Just humbly. Um, these are beautiful conversations. They're so rich for my own reflection and my growth, and it's enabling me to become more present with how relevant it is that we get to exchange and share. And I feel this subject is something that can be so much more explored in relationship to our indigenous nature, that those natural faculties, those natural abilities that are within us, which is to taste the air, to feel the air, to be present with the air, to be listening. It's all that dropping out of that kind of what I call the overuse and the misuse of the intelligence into the being. And I also know that there is a tremendous power, in a sense, to be unlocked, which has all been buried by all these years of trauma imprinting and not knowing that there's been any trauma. So this subsoil and the conversation that I feel to explore a bit more, I would really like to revisit with you next week, when we come back to the house. We've touched in and out on it. What are some of the hows and the ways? Because that is what I learned, is that the life ways of the new earth are life ways that are both syntropic, they are natural, and they are of 2021. So a lot of people think, oh, if I'm going
And
to return
beyond.
to my indigenous self, I'm going to just have to have a compost toilet out in the bush and There will be no toilet paper, and I will have to make my own cups, bowls, and mugs, and pots and pans. I'll have to learn how to make pottery. If you want to, we can go into all of that next week, because there seems to be quite a bit of distorted fantasies out there. There's the distorted fantasies of how beautiful and gorgeous and amazing it's all going to be, because we're all going to be singing kumbaya and having flowers in our hair and dancing around freely, because we'll probably all be breatharian because we don't need to eat. Well, that's a wonderful thought. That may also be an avoidance strategy.
I can blow that out of the water. I'm a shaman, apparently. Not having any labels, but I'm a 5-star girl.
So great. Nice. Thank you, Yvonne, for coming on again. We'll be back same time, 9 a.m. Bali time, 11 a.m. Melbourne time, which is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States. And if you have liked what you've listened to and you feel to share it out, I am entirely compromised on Facebook. It's lucky that I can even stream, because if I make a comment, or the last time I put a love heart on somebody's posts, and my comment went against the standards of the community, blah 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 blah, and so I got kicked off for another 3 days. So if you feel there's value in posting this into groups, I cannot facilitate that in any shape or form. So I welcome that to take place for those that are having a free ticket on Facebook.
Well, they haven't touched me for a long, long time. So I'm in the good girl place at the moment.
Great. So beautiful. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next week.
Bye-bye, and thank you for
Ciao.
listening. And thank you for you, Sovereign.
Yay. So good.